So I've been trying this thing that I hadn't tried since I was about 16 years old called a social life. It's been working for me. Hello everybody, I'm Roxy, this is Chaotic Bibliophile, and today I want to tell you about the books that I read in September. Now, before we get into that, a quick life update. If you haven't watched my life update vlog, I'll just link it down below and in the as always. But basically, I'm doing my master's, for which I have to read a fair bit, I would say, plus the social life aspect of just moving to a new place and wanting to participate and make friends and meet people has been sort of making a dent, I feel like, in my reading time. It's alright, it's fine. I need to clear some time and do some serious reading. That is irrelevant for this video. Although, in relation to that, this will be short. I have chosen 7 books out of the 20-something that I read in September. I am going to make this a 3-part wrap-up just because I need to be able to edit it quickly. I do have a lot of pre-filmed videos that I need to edit and show you guys, and I'm very excited for those. You know, I'm trying to keep up. I am also uploading my Nonfiction November TBR video in between that. Plus, I think there will be a Nonfiction November book tag of sorts that I also want to film and upload, plus the book club discussions and announcements. There's a lot coming up, so I didn't want to delay this anymore. So instead of having a 2-part wrap-up, I'm having 3-part wrap-ups, and we'll deal with October when we are well into November, probably. As long as we are talking about books and reading and being happy, that's all that matters. So the first book I'm going to tell you about is a reread, actually, of A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. This is a play that I really loved the first time around, and I loved it just as much the second time around. I reread it for a class, and I'm actually having the discussion seminar for this book later today, so I'm very excited. This was first produced in 1959, yes, in New York. It was a very momentous occasion because it was the first time like a Black woman had a Broadway opening. Was it Broadway? But you know, it was New York, big deal. It's set in Chicago. It's a 3-act play, I believe. Yes, 3-act play. It's about this Black family. It's a 3-generation sort of narrative where there's the mother and the father has passed away, leaving a significant inheritance that everyone has plans for. So there's also the son and the daughter. The daughter is studying to become a doctor, and she's sort of engaging with all these intellectual ideas of race and class in a university setting. Then there's the son Walter, who wants to use the money to invest in a liquor store. He is married to Ruth, and they have a son, Travis. It's about what to do with the money, but also what a good life means. And then it gets very specifically into the race aspect of the American dream and capitalism through a turn of events that is often discussed when this play is discussed, but I don't think I want to go into it because it's not a plot twist really, but I do think if you don't know what it is, it comes as such an enraging shock and you're just so outraged on behalf of this family. And overall, there is a sense of both hope and tragedy. It's such a bittersweet play. And at the time, actually, this was received in a bit of a colorblind way, as in, oh, this is about any family that is middle class and wants to sort of climb up or have stability and have a better life. And it is that, but its brilliance is that it is that plus the race aspect. And it's so good. The dialogue is so good. The pacing is really good. All the characters are very fleshed out. You really understand who these people are through their dialogue and their actions. I would die to see this live. And I really recommend it. Again, it's one of those plays that I really recommend if you don't read plays very often. It is very accessible in terms of imagining how everything is laid out because it's mostly set in the kitchen and the living room, I think. So all these very domestic spaces. It doesn't have a lot of complicated transitions. I think it's a really good place to start with reading plays, and it's just fascinating. So good. Then another reread for the same class, Passing by Nella Larsen. I read this last year. I've had a bit of a ride with this book. Honestly, the first time I read it, I didn't really like it very much. I had been so hyped for it. I was expecting outstanding writing, and I don't think that's the case, but at the same time, I got so much more out of it the second time around. I think it's a kind of book that is more interesting to dissect than read for the aesthetic aspects. And I think it also helped that I went into this reading the introduction now first because I knew what happened. And one of the points that really helped me grasp it more, made in the introduction, was that this has almost the structure of a 3-act play and that everything is exacerbated. I am, of course, super keen to see the film. I think it will work very well on a visual medium, and I know they've chosen to film in black and white to highlight the themes of passing, which I haven't talked about, sorry. So this book is about two frenemies, Irene and Claire. They were classmates back in school. They have since then gone different ways. Irene, who can pass as white and does so occasionally to go to certain parts. Oh, this was first published in 1929, so segregated spaces were still very much a thing. Irene passes sometimes, but she did marry a black man who is actually an activist, and he's very committed to black liberation, and there is some discussion of that in the book because Irene kind of doesn't understand that, doesn't feel that oppression as keenly, and she lives this very privileged, class-wise life. So although she is oppressed because of her race, she still grew up with a lot of economic privilege, and she now moves in intellectual and literary circles of Harlem Renaissance and such like. Now, Claire is the opposite. She grew up very underprivileged, economically speaking, but she's always had this currency in her beauty and her lighter skin. So she's actually married a white man who doesn't know she is black. She passes. She's chosen to completely make that transition. The book starts with them meeting and unsettling each other, sort of, because Claire feels disconnected from her heritage, and Irene is also crushing on Claire very hard. There are very interesting homoerotic undertones in this. It's just a very interesting book, I admit it. I don't know why, I just don't absolutely love the writing. I think I have fun dissecting it, but also because I think it's very surface level. Nella Larsen had a very interesting life, and by the end of it, she wasn't writing very much. She was very young when she started writing. She was, of course, infinitely talented. So I think there is some of that everything is surface level. There are a lot of metaphors and a lot of gaze exploration, and of course, identity exploration and class exploration. There are lots of fascinating elements in here, but I do feel like they are all bubbling up there and they are not very organically encoded in the narrative. It is a very melodramatic book, but again, reading it under a more theatrical light really helped me appreciate it more. I still recommend it. It's a good classic. It's also so short, and I do think it's fun, and it still encodes these 20s nostalgia, but also sense of tragedy that would struck because everything that is good and exuberant can't last. It's really solid, and I enjoyed it definitely more, and I would reread it for a third time, I think. So another popular book on BookTube, but also a very new book, which if you followed me for a while, you know that is completely unusual for me, but I picked it up for a challenge and I'm so glad I did. Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I haven't read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Muriel yet. I will probably at some point. However, I picked this up because it sounded really up my alley, and of course I was weary because the hype is dangerous, but I heard some very trusted reviewers give really good reviews of this, and so I picked it up, and again, I'm so happy I did. This was so eerie, and I don't know if it's because I read it when I was just moving into this very old apartment. I was by myself for a few days because my roommate was staying elsewhere and my other roommate hadn't arrived yet, so I was on my own in this new place. This is very much about this guy being on his own in this labyrinthic space. He doesn't exactly know what he's doing there except tracking the goings on, but he's not sure why. He just keeps the track, and there's this entity that visits him all the time and calls him Piranesi, but the narrator doesn't know his real name. And this is basically a diary narrative, or more than a diary, is more of an index narrative, sort of log of, again, whatever's going on in these places. Soon he discovers things are more sinister than he knows, and he can't trust anybody. I don't know, there's something in the writing, guys. You wouldn't think it would be so successful, again, because of the epistolary aspect. It's always hard to pull off atmosphere because of the inherent unreliability of the narrator, and also that distance. How much is realistic for this person to be writing in their diary, right? And that is such a tricky thing to get with these kinds of narratives. But it's so good. I didn't want to stop reading it. I think I read it in like 2 days, and it was only because I was very tired from moving. This is a book I could have devoured in one sitting. I don't know why this is not advertised more as a, not horror, but like suspense book. I don't know. It's just so atmospheric and eerie and creepy, but in a great way. The writing is superb. Just the right touch of fantasy, or the possibility of fantasy. The hype is well justified with this one. It's actually like nothing I've ever read. I feel like I've read things in the vicinity of this book, but nothing quite like this, and nothing so accomplished. I really recommend this. Something very different, but that I also loved, was Diary of a Young Naturalist by Dara McAnulty. This is literally his diary for a full year. It's broken down into the 4 seasons, and it has some lovely pictures that sort of preface each season. What makes it so interesting is that Dara McAnulty is an activist. He is very interested in conservation and nature and ecosystems, talks a lot about what his connection is with nature. He is Irish and grew up in rural Ireland. They moved to a city towards the end of the book. I don't know how big of a city it was, but it was a change in landscape. And of course, he talks a lot about landscape and the family's relationship to it. But he also talks about the more pragmatic or social aspects of his activism, giving conferences, attending protests, and networking, and finding a community there, and the good aspects of that, but also the exhausting aspects of that. I just love this so much. It was also very comforting because the way sensations and emotions and processing of outside stimuli are discussed in this book really resonated with me. But at the same time, as a city mouse, I was so enriched by such a different experience from mine. So it was very transportative personally, because it was someone who experiences things in a similar way to me, having completely different experiences. And I love that. I don't think this will be for everyone because it is very sincere, and it is, again, just these meditations on landscape. And he is very young, although he has a very good perspective because he also has like such a strong support network. If you're interested in just a very quiet, meditative book, I think you could really find solace in this for winter, for example. Nonfiction November if you live in a wintry place. But if not, this is also very good for spring. You could save it for Springathon next year, or if you're entering spring right now, then this is a great choice to just take a step back from life and reflect. I again devoured this because I just thought it was so good, and I also highlighted a lot. He has a really good way with words, and he finds very organic metaphors in the landscape and nature, which is not always the case with books that try to make that link between, you know, more sciencey or ecological stuff and daily life. But because for him it's such a natural thing, the metaphors make their way very organically, as I said. So I really recommend it. If it sounds like your thing, it is as good as everyone says. I'm so happy I read this. Another great book. I think the theme for this was mostly books that I loved. So this is a very positive video. I hope you enjoyed it, because there will be some not so great stuff coming up in other videos, all I'm saying. This book, which it's hilarious that is now everywhere, and here I thought I had almost rediscovered something. Anyways, this is Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingalls, and this edition has just been reissued by Favor and Favor. I heard about this in the Marlon and Jacob Read Dead People podcast. This is a novella and it's amazing. Marlon James was the biggest advocate, but I think both of them liked it a lot, and he described it as basically The Shape of Water if The Shape of Water wasn't a love story and it was very dry and realistic. It's exactly that. This is about a housewife in the 50s, I think, or 60s. She's bored. I think the husband is having an affair, and a waterman, a bit of a frog, I don't know, make of that what you will. There are a couple of descriptions here of his appearance. Actually, imagining it as the guy from The Shape of Water is not too far out. He escapes because he's been captured and he's been studied, of course, and he by chance comes into this woman's house and she hides him and they have an affair, and it's wonderful. He is a great guy. It's just told in this very realistic way, as if, yes, this is a bit strange, but it's not a fantasy book, you know what I mean? It's just something that occurs. Of course, there's the danger that he will be found out and whether he wants to return. I know it sounds so out there, but it's so well done. The writing is so good. It's just so good. The commentary on suburban life and desire, because they do have sex and a lot of it. It's just fabulous. There's such dry humor to this book, but at the same time, it's not made into a joke. And I don't know how Rachel Ingalls managed to achieve this, but I want to read more by her. And that's a problem because her books are hard to come by. I haven't found any other book by her yet, but I want to read more. I really want to read more. Anyways, but this you'll find everywhere because, again, it was just reprinted. And I don't know if this was a coincidence or if it was a result of Marlon James having discussed it, which if that's the case, whoa, power move. Blurbs. Marlon James, of course, Carmen Maria Machado, Patricia Lockwood, and Sarah Hall. Yeah, I really recommend it. So good. Another so good novella that is unfortunately not very frequently discussed. The Finishing School by Muriel Spark. This is my third Spark and my favorite yet, and I'll definitely keep reading her because she becomes more interesting to me as time passes. I wasn't that taken with Memento Mori. I'm sorry. I might reread it, but she also has like such a big bibliography that I don't know. I'm thinking about it. Anyways, why is this not more discussed when it comes to campus novels? I just don't understand. It's about this school, which is almost a scam. It barely isn't. That moves around Europe, and it's basically designed for rich parents to send their kids that don't fit into other schools or want to like do some thinking and writing before college. Very much like a liberal arts sort of situation, but much smaller. And it's basically just an excuse so the protagonist, called Roland, can write his novel, which he is failing at. And the plot focuses on his tense relationship with this gifted student called Chris, I want to say, who is writing this massive historical novel that is supposed to be a hit, and he is just going. Very smart and very aware of Roland's jealousy, but he feeds on it. And there's this psychological game in it, which is very Muriel Spark, the darkest side of people, but never making it super dramatic, never making it super over the top. So I really recommend it. Again, I don't know why this isn't more popular. What I will say is that overall, this is Spark in a more compassionate mood. In a way, she grants a bit more grace to her characters, I think, instead of going over the top. And I think some people might find that a bit of a weakness, but I think it's a strength, because if not, it could be very melodramatic and it doesn't go that route. So I just really, really enjoy this. And finally, the book that launched an obsession, and you will see that soon, Killing and Dying by Adrian, I want to say Tomine. No, Tomine. Well, this guy. He is a writer and artist. He's from California, and I think you can definitely tell, although he now lives in New York and has been working for the New Yorker. I don't know if he still does, but he worked for the New Yorker for a long time, and one of the other books that I have are actually sort of sketches from New York. But this feels absolutely Cali. You can totally feel that atmosphere here. There is something so uncanny about these stories, but not in a gothic way exactly, more in a modernity has fucked us all, and this is how our lives are going. And at the same time, it's not cynical, like people keep trying, but they are heartbreaking. With a title like Killing and Dying, what else do you expect? But look at this art. Look at, it's just so good. The palette works so well, and the storytelling and the pacing. This is one of my favorite books that I've read not only this year, but in my entire life. I think he might be my favorite graphic artist and writer, on par with Alison Bechdel. Okay, let's not get carried away. I still love Alison Bechdel, but he's so good. And this launched an obsession. I have since purchased all of these books, except one that I haven't found yet, but it's on the list, believe me. It's just so good. I don't know how to stress how much I love this. Maybe I should tell you some of the stories. Okay, one is about rehab and an abusive relationship. Another is about a doppelganger that does porn. There is another story about a young girl who wants to be a comedian. So these very out there, but at the same time quotidian situations that I don't think often feature in fiction. And so read this. Even if you don't read a lot of graphic novels, if you read mostly literary fiction, I think you will love this. You will definitely see this on my top fiction reads of the year. I think this was a wrap-up of love, and I'm so excited for that. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please give a thumbs up and subscribe, and comment, have you read any of these books? Do you want to read any of these books now that I've talked about them? Remember to check out the book club and all the other things that I've been doing that will be linked down below. If you have nothing to say about these books in particular, just tell me what you read in September that stood out to you, or what you've been reading now and loving. I hope you've been doing great, and see you next week with another video. Bye. I got distracted eyeing this book and remembering how good it was.